The silver spoon fell from his fingers. It did not clatter. The thick, silent rug absorbed the sound, but the violence of the gesture was loud enough. Mr. Kang's hand, a roadmap of scars and heavy gold, lay flat on the polished mahogany of the dining table. His knuckles were white. Across from him, the bowl of meticulously prepared lobster bisque remained untouched, its creamy surface starting to film over in the chilled air of the vast room. Robert, the chef with a resume that spanned 3 continents and 2 Michelin stars, stood by the doorway, his shoulders tensed so tightly they seemed to reach his ears. He had been with Mr. Kang for 2 years, and in that time, he had learned that the man's silence was more dangerous than any shout. The past 3 months, however, had been a new kind of quiet. A hollow, consuming stillness that starved the air itself. Mr. Kang had not truly eaten in 94 days. He had tasted, sipped, pushed food around a plate with a fork, but he had not consumed a full meal. His suits, once tailored to a frame of solid power, now hung with a subtle looseness around the shoulders. Minjun, the man built like a granite wall who stood perpetually near his boss's left, did not move. His eyes, however, flickered from the bowl to his master's face, a silent calculation running behind their flat, dark surface. This was the ritual. The offering, the rejection, the silent retreat. Every day, 3 times a day. The house held its breath, waiting for the man at its center to either break or fade away completely. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper who had been in this house since before it was a fortress, watched from the shadows of the hall. She saw not the feared syndicate leader, but the ghost of a man haunted by a loss no one dared name. She saw the expensive food, a monument to a life he no longer had the stomach for. Her face was impassive, a lifetime of service etched into its lines, but her mind was already turning, searching for a solution where chefs and doctors had failed. The problem was not the food. The problem was the hunger itself. It had died. The next morning, Mrs. Park led the new girl through the service corridors. Her name was Aisha. She was 18, with eyes that saw everything and a posture that apologized for nothing. She wore the dark blue uniform and crisp white apron that had been laid out for her. It felt strange against her skin, a costume for a life she was only visiting. The house was a cathedral of marble and silence, a place where wealth was so profound it became oppressive. The air was cool and smelled of lemon oil and something else, something metallic and sharp like old grief. Mrs. Park's voice was low, her English precise. You will handle the domestic duties for the West Wing. Dusting, linens, general upkeep. You do not enter the master's study unless explicitly told. You do not speak to Mr. Kong unless he speaks to you first. You will be invisible. Do you understand? Aisha nodded, her gaze taking in the polished floors that reflected a distorted, elongated version of herself. Invisible. She could do that. It was a skill learned early. Mrs. Park paused outside the kitchen, a vast, stainless steel cavern where Chef Robert was already directing 2 assistants with tense, clipped commands. The master's mood is delicate, the older woman said, her choice of word a masterpiece of understatement. His health is a matter of great concern. Do not cause any disruptions. Aisha's eyes fell on a cart laden with rejected breakfast dishes. A single bite taken from a piece of toast, a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice untouched. The waste was staggering, more food than she sometimes saw in a week. She saw the fear in the kitchen staff's movements, the way they avoided eye contact with the doorway, as if the master's displeasure could travel through the air itself. She felt the cold dread that permeated the house, a foundation built on the whims of one powerful, broken man. Her own life was a series of carefully managed pressures, tuition, rent, the gnawing worry for her future, but this was different. This was the pressure of a collapsing star, threatening to pull everything into its orbit. She smoothed her apron, the starchy fabric a thin shield, and prepared to become a ghost in this silent, grieving palace. For weeks, Aisha moved through the grand, empty rooms like a shadow. She learned the geography of the house, the specific way the late afternoon sun hit the library floor, the faint scent of cigar smoke lingering in the upholstery of the study, the cold spot by the large window in the master bedroom where Mr. Kang often stood. staring out at the city lights he owned but could no longer see. She performed her duties with a quiet efficiency that pleased Mrs. Park. She dusted priceless antiques without curiosity, changed linens of impossible thread counts without envy, and polished silver until it shone with a cold, impersonal light. She kept her head down and her thoughts to herself. She saw Mr. Kong only in passing, a glimpse of a dark suit moving down a long hallway, the back of his head as he sat in the dining room, the sound of his heavy, measured footsteps on the floor above. He was less a man and more a presence, a center of gravity around which the entire household orbited in fearful silence. The tension only grew. Chef Robert's face became more strained, the circles under his eyes darkening. More food came back untouched. The whispers among the staff grew more urgent. They spoke of doctors, of specialists flown in from overseas, of hushed, angry phone calls that Minjun would take in the garden. Aisha listened, piecing together the story from fragments. A wife, lost a year ago. A man who had conquered a city but could not conquer his own sorrow. One evening, she was in the main kitchen late, long after the dinner service had failed and the staff had retreated. She was using the large table to spread out her textbooks, the stark reality of an organic chemistry exam a welcome anchor in this unreal world. The house was profoundly silent. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that felt heavier than simple emptiness. A deep ache of homesickness settled in her chest. On nights like this, when the world felt too sharp and her own path too narrow, her mother would have made a stew. It wasn't a fancy dish. It was a simple, humble thing of beef and root vegetables, simmered for hours with a few key spices her grandmother had taught her. It was the taste of warmth, of safety, of being cared for. It was the smell of home. On impulse, driven by a need for some small comfort, she went to the pantry. She found what she needed. The ingredients were far better than any she had ever used, but the process was the same. She moved around the vast, professional kitchen, her actions guided by muscle memory, by a legacy of love passed down in a simple recipe. She wasn't cooking for the boss. She was cooking for the quiet, lonely girl in the blue uniform. She was cooking for her mother's memory. The aroma began to fill the kitchen, rich and savory, a scent of browned meat and slow-cooked onions, of thyme and bay leaf. It was a smell that was deeply, fundamentally out of place in this house of delicate sauces and foreign delicacies. It was the smell of a home, not a mansion. Aisha was lost in the process, stirring the pot with a long wooden spoon, her chemistry textbook forgotten on the steel counter. The rhythmic motion was a comfort, the steam a warm veil. She did not hear Minjun enter. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, watching her. His usual stony expression was softened by something unreadable. He had been on his way to the gym in the basement, another sleepless night stretching before him, but the smell had stopped him, pulling him off his path. It was an aroma that bypassed the brain and went straight to the heart, a memory of a life before this one. He finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "What is that?" Aisha startled, spinning around, the spoon held like a weapon. She relaxed when she saw it was him. Of all the staff, he was the most intimidating and, strangely, the one she feared the least. He watched Mr. King with a fierce loyalty that seemed to contain a deep, weary sadness. "It's just stew," she said quietly. "For me. I was studying and I was hungry." Minjun walked closer, looking into the large pot. The stew was thick, dark, and unpretentious. It looked like something a farmer would eat after a long day in the fields. It was honest. He looked from the pot to her face. He saw no ambition there, no scheme. He saw a young woman trying to find a small piece of comfort in a cold house. He had watched his boss wither for months, rejecting every culinary masterpiece placed before him. He had stood by as the man's immense power turned inward, consuming him from the inside out. This smell, it was different. It wasn't trying to impress. It was just food. "Make a bowl," Minjun said. It was not a request. Aisha hesitated. "It's not for him." "It's not. Chef's quality. The chef's quality is starving him," Minjun stated, his voice flat. "Make a bowl." A small 1 inch. There was a silent battle in her eyes, the order to remain invisible warring with the quiet command of the man before her. But she also saw the desperation in his gaze, the plea hidden beneath the order. She ladled a small amount of the stew into a simple ceramic bowl, nothing like the fine china used for the master's meals. She placed it on a small tray with a plain spoon. Minjun took the tray without another word and turned, his heavy footsteps receding down the silent hall, leaving Aisha alone in the warm, fragrant kitchen, a sudden, cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Mr. Kong sat in his study, the city lights a galaxy of indifferent diamonds below. The papers on his desk were meaningless, the numbers a language he no longer cared to speak. He was hollowed out, a shell of the man he had been. The grief was a physical presence, a cold hand gripping his insides, squeezing away all appetite, all desire, all life. He heard the door open and did not look up. He expected it to be Minjun with tea he would not drink or a plate of fruit he would not touch. But then the smell reached him. It was faint at first, then richer. It was an impossible scent to find in this room, in this life. It was the smell of dirt-caked potatoes and tough cuts of meat made tender by time. It was the smell of his mother's kitchen, a tiny room in a village long since wiped off the map, a place he had not allowed himself to remember in 40 years. Minjun placed the small tray on the edge of the massive desk. The bowl was plain, earthenware, the kind of thing you'd find in a peasant's home. The stew within was a deep, unadorned brown. There was no garnish, no artistic drizzle of oil. It was brutally simple. Mr. Kang stared at it. His first instinct was anger, a surge of fury at this insult. This peasant food in his palace. Who dared? He looked up at Minjun, his eyes cold fire. But Minjun's face was neutral, waiting. The enforcer had never brought him food before. That was not his role. The sheer oddity of the act held his anger in check. The aroma continued its work, unlocking doors in his memory he had welded shut decades ago. He saw his mother, her hands chapped and rough, stirring a black iron pot over a weak fire. He could feel the cold dirt floor beneath his bare feet. He could taste the hunger, the real, desperate hunger of a childhood spent with too little. He picked up the spoon. It felt light, cheap. He dipped it into the stew. The texture was right. Not pureed into a velvety submission, but full of substance. He raised the spoon to his lips. The first taste was a cataclysm. It was not a flavor. It was a memory, a resurrection. It was the exact taste of his mother's stew. The specific balance of salt and herbs, the way the carrots held a slight sweetness, the profound, earthy richness of the broth. It was impossible. He froze, the spoon halfway to his mouth for a second bite. His hand began to tremble. A single, hot tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his stone-like face. He did not wipe it away. He took another bite. And another. He ate until the bowl was empty, scraping the sides with the plain spoon. Then he looked at Minjun, his voice a raw whisper. Who? The next day, a new rule was established in the house. Chef Robert was to prepare meals for the staff and any guests. Mr. King's meals, however, were to be cooked by Aisha. Only by Aisha. The decree was delivered by Mrs. Park, her face giving away nothing. The kitchen staff stared at the young woman in the blue uniform with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and profound relief. Chef Robert, a man of immense pride, simply nodded, the fight gone out of him. He was a master of cuisine, but he could not cook a memory. Aisha's life changed. Her duties as a maid were quietly reassigned. Her domain became the kitchen. She did not cook complicated things. She cooked the food of her childhood, the recipes her mother had written down in a worn, grease-stained notebook she kept in her room. Fried chicken that was crisp and juicy. Thick, savory-colored greens. Simple soups and hearty breads. And every few days, the beef stew. She would bring the tray to his study or the small private dining room herself. He never spoke to her. Not once. He would simply nod, his eyes fixed on the tray. She would set it down and leave. But he started to watch her. He noticed things. He saw the faint ink stains on her fingers from her late night studying. He saw the way she moved with a quiet, determined grace, never wasting emotion. He saw the worn-out cover of her chemistry textbook, its spine held together with tape. She never seemed afraid of him. While the rest of his world walked on eggshells, she met his gaze for a brief, steady moment before looking away. There was no fear in her eyes, only a calm, professional distance. One morning, she arrived in the kitchen to find a stack of brand-new textbooks on the counter where she usually worked. The entire syllabus for her semester, including the expensive supplementary guides she couldn't afford. There was no note. No explanation. She looked up at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling, its small black lens and unblinking eye. She knew. She ran her hand over the crisp, smooth cover of the top book, a small, complicated feeling blooming in her chest. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was a sense of being seen. In this house where her job was to be invisible, the most powerful man within its walls had truly seen her. The change in Mr. Kong was slow, but undeniable. Color returned to his face. The looseness in his tailored suits disappeared as he regained the weight he had lost. The oppressive, suffocating silence in the house began to lift, replaced by a tense but stable quiet. He began taking meetings again, his voice on the phone regaining its old edge of command. His empire, which had been teetering on the edge of a power vacuum, began to stabilize. The whispers in the city's underworld took note. The old wolf was back. But his return to power made others nervous. Men who had been circling, sensing weakness, now had to retreat. One of these men was Mr. Choi, a subordinate who had once been a favorite, a man King had treated like a younger brother. Choi's ambition, however, had curdled with Kang's grief. He had made moves, forged alliances, preparing to take over. Now he found himself exposed and vulnerable. He saw Aisha as the source of this renewed strength. He did not see a young woman cooking simple meals. He saw a witch, a strategist, a secret weapon. He believed she held some kind of power over Kong, and he decided she was the key to clawing his way back, or destroying Kang for good. He began by trying to buy her loyalty. A thick envelope of cash was left for her by one of his men in the market where she bought groceries. She left it on the vendor's table untouched. Then he tried threats. A quiet word from a stranger on her way to the bus stop, a suggestion that it would be a shame if something happened to her scholarship. She reported the incident to Minjun, her voice low and steady, recounting the man's words without a tremor. Minjun's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The final attempt was more direct. Mr. Choi arranged for Aisha to be cornered in a service alley behind the house one evening as she was taking out the trash. Two of his men, large and imposing, blocked her path. They didn't touch her. They just stood there, their presence a promise of violence. "Mr. Choi just wants to talk," one of them said, his voice a greasy imitation of politeness. But before Aisha could even process the threat, two other figures emerged from the deeper shadows. One was Minjun. The other was Mr. Kang himself. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple dark sweater. He looked less like a crime lord and more like a weary father. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He looked at Choi's men, and the temperature in the alley dropped by 20 degrees. "Get out of my house," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. The two men practically stumbled over each other in their haste to disappear. Mr. Kang did not look at Aisha. He turned and walked back into the house, expecting her to follow. Minjun gave her a short, sharp nod before melting back into the shadows. Aisha's heart was hammering against her ribs, but she gathered herself, her hands smoothing the front of her apron in a gesture of restoring order. She followed him not to the grand study or the formal dining room, but to the kitchen. Her kitchen. He was standing by the large central island, his hands flat on the cool stainless steel. It was the same posture he used at the head of the dining table, a position of power, but here, in this warm, fragrant space, it looked different. He looked grounded. He looked tired. They stood in silence for a long time. The only sound was the low hum of the industrial refrigerator. He had never spoken a single word to her, and now the silence felt charged with everything unsaid. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. He was still not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the grain of the steel. "The stew," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that hung in the air, demanding a response. "Where did you learn to make it?" Aisha took a breath. She thought of her mother, of their small apartment that always smelled of something good cooking, of the love that was so abundant it made up for everything they lacked. "My mother taught me," she said, her voice soft but clear. It was her mother's recipe before that. It was our food. For when we were sick, or when the month was long and the money was short. Or just for cold nights, he finally turned his head and looked at her. His eyes, which she had only ever seen as hard and cold, were filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "My mother made that stew," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "In a village you have never heard of. A place of mud and stone. We were poor. Not like you know poor in this country. We were hungry poor. That stew was all we had. It was everything." He looked away again, toward the dark window that reflected their two forms in the bright kitchen. "She died when I was 10. I haven't tasted it since. I thought the memory was gone." He confessed it all in a low, steady monotone. The brutal climb out of poverty, the things he had done, the man he had to become to survive. He spoke of his wife, of how her laughter had been the only thing that could silence the ghosts of his past. And when she was gone, the ghosts had come back, and they had stolen his hunger for life. That first bite. He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. It was like she was in the room. "My mother." For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't alone with the ghosts. He dealt with Mr. Choi the next day. The man was summoned to the house, expecting death. He walked into the study, pale and sweating, to find Mr. Kang sitting behind his desk, a cup of tea before him. There was no anger in Kang's eyes, only a deep, weary finality. He did not have Choi killed. He did not have him broken. He exiled him. He stripped him of his power, his money, his influence, and put him on a plane back to the old country, with just enough to live out his days in obscurity. It was an act of mercy, a gesture the old Kong would never have made. The organization saw it and understood. Something had fundamentally changed in their leader. That evening, Mr. Kong called Aisha to his study. She stood before his desk, her hands folded neatly behind her back. "Your employment here as a maid is terminated," he said, his tone formal. A flicker of panic went through her, but his next words stopped it. "I have arranged for your university tuition to be paid in full. All 4 years. And your living expenses. It will be handled through an academic foundation. My name will not be attached to it." He slid a folder across the desk. It contained all the paperwork, pristine and official. "You are free to leave," he continued, looking at her directly. "Your service here is complete. You have repaid a debt I did not know I was owed." Aisha looked at the folder, then back at his face. She saw the armored patriarch, the feared boss, but underneath it, she saw the lonely man from the kitchen. The boy who missed his mother. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. His eyebrows rose slightly, the first expression of surprise she had ever seen on his face. "This is no place for you," he said. "You have a life to live." "A good 1 inch. My mother always said you don't turn your back on family," Aisha replied quietly. "And you don't leave a man to fight his ghosts alone." For a long moment, he just looked at her, the silence stretching. A slow, sad smile touched his lips, a ghost of an expression. "The uniform will no longer be necessary," was all he said. Years passed. The house on the hill remained a fortress of quiet power, but its heart had changed. Aisha graduated from the university with honors, her degree in chemistry hanging in a simple frame in her room, a room that was no longer in the staff quarters, but in the main wing of the house. She never wore the blue uniform again. She became the quiet, steady center of the household. She was not a servant, not a daughter, not a wife. She was something else, a category for which they had no name. She was family. She managed the house with Mrs. Park's guidance, learning the intricate dance of running an empire from its domestic heart. She became Mr. Kang's most trusted confidant. He would sit with her in the kitchen, the vast stainless steel room now a place of warmth and counsel, and speak of his business in plain terms. She would listen, her sharp mind cutting through the complexities, offering insights that were simple, direct, and devastatingly wise. She never lost her quiet humility, but she gained a profound, unshakable strength. She was the only person who could tell him he was wrong. She was the only person he would listen to. The enforcer, Minjun, watched over her with the fierce, silent loyalty of a guardian. He saw in her the continuation of his master's life, the anchor that had saved him from the abyss. The house was no longer a monument to grief. It was a home. The final scene unfolds on a quiet Sunday evening. Mr. Kang is older now, his hair streaked with silver, the lines on his face softened by time and a measure of peace. He sits not in the grand dining room, but at the small table in the kitchen. The lights are low. Opposite him sits Aisha, no longer an 18-year-old girl in a maid's uniform, but a poised, self-assured woman in her late 20s. Between them on the table are two simple earthenware bowls filled with the rich, dark beef stew. The aroma hangs in the air, a familiar blessing. They eat in a comfortable silence, the quiet rhythm of their spoons against the ceramic a conversation in itself. He looks at her, and in his eyes, there is a universe of gratitude, a depth of feeling he will never speak aloud. She meets his gaze and offers a small, genuine smile. The gesture is enough. The legacy of two mothers from two different worlds has converged in this kitchen, in this simple meal, healing a man and building a family in the most unlikely of places. The spoon in Mr. Kang's hand is steady. He is finally and completely home.